Oi, listen here, ya gits. Picture this. A whole planet's sky gone black with smoke, the ground shaking under a million stompin' boots, and the air so thick with shooter fire you could almost bite it. Every throat from here to infinity is hollerin', "Wah!" So loud it makes your ears bleed. And at the tip of that green tide, standing high atop a mound of spent shells and burning scrap, is me. Go on, have a laugh. A runty lil grot, barely up to an orc's waist, leading the biggest wah you ever did see. I got a boss pole in one hand, a big totem with a grinning squig skull on top, and a roaring shooter in the other. And all them slavering orc boys, big, mean, ugly brutes, they're following my lead. Unbelievable, innit? What self-respecting orc would take orders from a Gretchin, one of the runts they usually kick around for fun? Well, turns out when the bullets are flying and the blood's flowing, orcs don't stop to measure how tall their boss is. They just want the biggest brawl and the loudest daka. And if some crazy grot is the one giving them a good fight, they'll charge behind him all the same. Still, I ain't gonna pretend it was easy getting to this point. I had to be 10 times more cunning than the smartest orc, and just as dead-hard as the toughest, in my own little way. I'm not bragging. Well, maybe a bit. I'm just pointing out the facts. See, I wasn't born important. Nah, I was spawned in the muck like any other grot, one scrawny little green runt among dozens. I clawed my way out of a pile of fungus one night under 2 moons on some emperor-forsaken world in the middle of Warboss Grimsnaga's camp. Grimsnaga Bloodbasher. Now there was a prime example of a Goth Warboss, big as a truck, mean as a squiggoth, and about as subtle as a kick in the head. He had a face like a squig pie and a temper shorter than my thumb. Under his boot, us grots was little more than punching bags and minesweepers. Back then, my biggest dream was simply not getting stepped on before each day's end. I scurried about doing all-day nasty jobs. If I wasn't cleaning the gunk off me boss's favorite iron gob, I was out in the minefields poking for boom squigs so day boys wouldn't lose their legs. Life as a Gretchin under a mighty war boss ain't exactly grand. We get to handle all the important tasks. You know, shoveling dung, brewing fungus beer, feeding attack squigs, fetching ammo, all while trying not to draw any attention. The rule was simple. If the orcs noticed ya, it was usually because they were about to use ya as a football. I learned to be sneaky real quick. Not the fun kind of sneaky like a commando book blood axe, neither. I'm talking the stick to shadows, shut your gob, and make yourself useful kinda sneaky. Low cunning and a bit of luck, those were the only things keeping me alive each day. I'd filch bits of scrap and ammo here and there to trade for favors from other grots or a swig of fungus ale to keep me nerves steady. I even rigged myself a hiding spot in the refuse pit. Disgusting but effective, for when the boys got particularly rowdy with the grot tossing games. Nothing spoils an orc's fun like their favorite target, mysteriously vanishing when it's tossin' time. Did I ever dream I'd be boss one day? Zog off. Course not. Any grot with half a brain knows his place, at the bottom of the heap, out of sight. I figured I'd live short and die whimpering, like most of me kind, squashed under a boot or used as a living shield by some chuckling orc. And that almost happened plenty of times. I got scars on scars from playtime with the boys. Once a bored knob used me as a makeshift club to bash another knob's head in. Good news, he won that fight. Bad news, he didn't let go of me fast enough and I nearly got twisted in half. Another time I was chucked into a trench full of barbed wire just to see how long it'd take me to crawl out. I did crawl out, clever thing. I used a dead squig as a cushion to clamber over, but I made sure not to look too proud of myself. A Grot who looks too clever invites trouble, so I kept my head down, my ears open, and my knife sharp, for cutting rations and maybe the occasional purse strap. Never for fighting an orc, I ain't suicidal. Now, old Warboss Grimsnaga, he wasn't just content rousting grots and bashing boys' heads together in camp. He had big ideas, like most Goth bosses. Wanted to conquer the whole continent, maybe the whole world. The Humies on that planet were mostly PDFs and a few regiments of Imperial Guard. Nothing he couldn't handle, so he thought. We was in the middle of a grand WAAAGH campaign, one that had been going on for months. The boys were spoiling for a final massive fight, and Grimsnaga was only too happy to oblige. One fateful day, I remember it well, 'cause it was raining sump sludge from the sky, as it often did on that emperor-forsaken rock. We found ourselves on the outskirts of Hive Rockdash, a fortified Humie city, all high walls and glowing void shields humming over its spires. This was the big prize of the continent. The Humies had dug in deep, with trenches and big boom guns, and enough lasfire to turn a whole mob into green goo. But Grimsnaga, he just laughed. To him, more defenses just meant more fun breaking them. I was scuttling behind the lines, loading magazines for the boys' shooters and passing out extra stick bombs, trying not to think about the bloodbath that was coming. I'd seen plenty of scraps, but a full frontal assault on a hive city is something else. It's the kind of glorious charge that gets orcs foaming at the mouth, and grots like me quietly soiling our breeches. Still, I did my job, because running wasn't an option. Runtherd Scabbers was watching us grots with his piggish eyes, his grabbar stick in hand, ready to yank back any coward who thought about legging it. At dawn, the Warboss gave the order, "Charge, ya gits!" And off they went, a tidal wave of green muscle and iron roaring toward the city's defenses. Void shields crackled as orc rockets and bullets slammed into the invisible force fields. Lascannons from the hive walls lanced out bright beams, vaporizing boys by the dozen. Artillery shells whistled down, turning the ground and a lot of boys into red slurry. It was an absolute hellstorm, the kind of grand spectacle orcs live for. Grimsnaga led from the front atop his war bike, a massive spiked wheel of death he called Da Devastata. I can still picture him, a towering slab of scarred green flesh, swinging a crackling power claw in one hand and firing a custom Daco gun with the other, cackling like it was the best day of his life. Probably was at that. Behind him thundered a mob of knobs in crude mega armor, basically walking tanks, and whole hordes of boys chanting war songs even as they were mowed down. And where was I? Well, I was a few steps behind, scurrying from crater to crater, doing my best to not get trampled. A grot in a pitched battle looks for two things: cover and an exit plan. I had the first, ducking behind a wrecked truck that a lucky basilisk shot had blown to bits. But the second? There was nowhere to go but forward if I wanted to live. The orcs behind me were pushing ahead, and any grot who tried to run back would get a bolt round up his backside from the commissar-like Runtherds. So I pressed on, clutching a sack of reloads and a rusty grot blaster pistol I'd borrowed, just in case. My heart, or whatever little pump we grots got, was hammering fit to burst. To my amazement, the orc charge actually reached the hive walls. Despite the carnage, enough boys survived to slam into the defenses like an angry green tsunami. They surged into the moat and up the bastion lines, throwing grapnels, ladders, even each other onto the ramparts. Grimsnaga was first through, of course. His warbike hit the wall at full tilt, crump, and he actually managed to ride halfway up the fortress wall in a shower of sparks, cackling all the way. He leapt off at the top, power claw whirring, and started crumping heads like ripe squigs. The boys poured in behind him through breaches and shattered gates, howling with bloodlust. I scrambled through behind a knot of shooter boys who were laying down covering fire. Honestly, I was just trying to stay in the middle of the mob. Not so far front that I'd catch a guardsman's bayonet, but not so far back that I'd get snagged by a runtherd for shirking. I saw things in that assault that'll haunt and tickle my dreams forever. Orks in a proper frenzy, tearing armed humans limb from limb. A killer canal, one of our Grot-piloted walkers, stomping around with a poor guardsman impaled on its buzzsaw arm. Big burly ogrins, on the Hume side, laying about with giant mauls, flattening boys until those ogrins got blown apart by tankbuster bomb, and everywhere smoke, fire, and the smell of blood and burning promethium. It was beautiful in the most horrific way. In the chaos atop the wall, Warboss Grimsnaga was already charging inward. I caught a glimpse of him bellowing for the gate controls. He wanted to throw open the hive gates and let the whole green tide flood in. Several of his knobs ran to obey, or more likely to beat each other to the honor of smashing said controls. That's when fate, or maybe Mork himself, decided it was time for a good laugh. Just as the Warboss and his retinue were smack in the middle of the gatehouse, something went boom. And by Mork, I mean a boom. A brilliant flash of light, a thundercrack. Then the top of the gatehouse erupted in flame. Turns out, those Humies had rigged a bunch of fuel and explosives there, waiting for us. Maybe Grimsnaga set off a trap, or maybe one of our own tankbuster rockets hit something it shouldn't. Either way, one moment I see our Warboss ripping a door off its hinges, and the next, blam! A fireball swallows him and the entire gatehouse in a cloud of smoke and shrapnel. The shockwave knocked me flat on my face. Ears ringing, vision blurred, I pulled my sorry hide out of a rubble pile. The giant metal gate had partially blown inward and come crashing down. I peered through the smoke and rubble, my keen little Grot eyes trying to adjust, and I saw no sign of Grimsnaga or his knobs. Just a blazing heap of twisted metal and charred orc bits where they'd been. In one blast, the biggest, baddest orc on the planet was reduced to smoke and giblets. For a few heartbeats, there was an eerie pause in the battle. Orcs and Humies alike were a bit stunned, I reckon. The Humies at their own successful trap, and the Orcs at the sudden silence of their bosses bellowing. Then all hell broke loose again, but this time it was different. Without Grimsnaga's thunderous voice urging them on, some of the Orcs wavered. I saw a few backs starting to turn, confusion in their red eyes. A confused orc is a dangerous thing. Dangerous to everyone around him, that is. They ain't good at plan Bs. The frontline mobs had made it inside the walls but were taking losses. Now some boys started snarling at each other, arguing who was in charge. I watched a big knob, one of Grimsnaga's favored odd cases named Racket, shove another and roar, "I'm the boss now." "Like Zog you are," another knob yelled, and promptly shot Racket in the face with his slugger. Racket's head exploded like a squig egg, and that was it. The Orcs fell to infighting right there in the breached gate. Knob clashed with knob, each trying to prove he was toughest. Boys that had been charging the Humies moments ago now turned their choppers on each other in a frenzy of confusion and ego. Meanwhile, the Humies weren't slow to take advantage. Their officers were shouting orders. I glimpsed a commissar in a fancy hat rallying a line of soldiers. Lasgun volleys started pouring into us anew. A sentinel walker strode through the smoke, autocannon chugging, cutting down a cluster of boys who were too busy brawling to notice. If things kept on like this, our once unstoppable WAAAGH was about to collapse into a rout. Or a slaughter. I might have been just a runty Grot, but I could see the writing on the wall, probably better than any of the bickering knobs could. If someone didn't do something fast, we were all as good as dead, Grots and Orks alike. The Humies would massacre the infighting Orks and push us out, and next thing you know, I'd be either bayoneted or back in chains. No doubt they'd love a few Grots for target practice. And frankly, neither of those options suited me. I had to think, and quick. My survival instincts, those low cunning all Grots are said to have, kicked into overdrive. Maybe it was pure desperation. Maybe a spark of divine inspiration from Mork, the cunning but brutal god. Himself. All I know is, I acted without really knowing why at first. I dropped my sack of ammo, no one was taking time to reload anyway, and scrambled up the heap of rubble that had been the gatehouse. There was a chunk of the boss's warbike wreckage sticking out at an angle, and I clambered up it, giving me a little height. Just enough to be seen, maybe. I drew in a huge breath. My lungs felt about to burst, and I screamed at the top of my little lungs, "Oi, quit your squabbling, ya gits! The fight's over there!" I punctuated this by firing my Grot blaster pistol wildly in the direction of the Humies, dropping a few rounds into a stunned group of Imperial guardsmen who were advancing behind a sentinel. Pure luck. One of my shots hit a fuel canister on the sentinel's side, and whoom! The walker stumbled as flames spurted from it. Orks are simple creatures in many ways. In the din of battle, what matters is noise, spectacle, and momentum. My screechy voice ordinarily wouldn't carry far, but standing on that rubble with an explosion suddenly blooming behind the enemy's lines, courtesy of my lucky shot, I managed to grab their attention. A dozen Ork eyes, then scores, swung toward me. To them, it must have been a mad sight. A tiny soot-covered Gretchin on a pile of scrap, waving a smoking pistol and actually yelling at them. Some stopped fighting each other out of sheer confusion. I even saw a few mouths hang open, tusks dripping with gore, as if to say, "What's this then? Did that Grot just give us an order?" I'll admit my heart nearly froze right there. This could have gone very, very badly. One wrong move and the boys might have just roared, "Kill the runty loudmouth," and I'd be pasted across the rocks. But I couldn't stop now. I channeled every ounce of bossiness I'd ever heard from Grimsnaga or any other warboss and put it into my voice. There was still a battle to win, and if I had to become an Ork for a minute to do it, so be it. "Who cares who's the boss?" I shrilled, jabbing a clawed finger toward the Imperials beyond the debris. "The Humies are getting away with shooting us while you zoggin' gets argue. You boys want to run like weedy Grots, or you want to get in there and crump 'em for Grimsnaga?" I invoked the old warboss's name for good measure. Figured loyalty might still stir 'em. Orks value strength, sure, but also vengeance. Their beloved boss just got blown to bits. If I could redirect their rage toward the enemy, they might just forget I was a Grot at all. An Ork boy near the front, one with half his face burned off, I recall, snarled and raised his chopper high. "Yay!" he roared. "The runty's right. Let's kill those Humies dead." WAAAGH! Other throats joined in. Bless their simple, violent minds, a good number of the boys immediately turned back toward the enemy lines, pounding their chests and firing wildly, as if to make up for lost time. The brawl between knobs faltered as their would-be audiences peeled away. Nothing diffuses an Ork squabble like the promise of even bloodier carnage elsewhere. One of the surviving knobs, a big lug named Uzgrok, seized on my words and shouted, "For Grimsnaga, kill 'em all!" He barreled forward, rousing the others, an implicit acceptance that the Humies, not each other, were the priority. That wave of ferocity I'll never forget. The Orks snapped out of their funk, charged with renewed fury. They slammed into the oncoming Imperial reinforcements like a green avalanche. I might have even felt proud if I wasn't busy ducking a last bolt that nearly took my head off. As the boys rushed past my perch, I hopped down and trailed behind, staying in the press. We were back in business, the momentum ours again. In minutes, we overran the frazzled defenders at the gate. The interior of the hive city beyond beckoned, full of terrified prey. With a collective howl, the orcs stormed in to continue the slaughter in the streets. Now, let's be clear, the boys weren't following me, not consciously anyway. They were following the roar of battle, but in that critical moment, I had been the one to direct their attention, to tip them toward the right target. A grot. Imagine that. Honestly, at the time, I was too pumped on adrenaline and terror to fully appreciate it. I just knew I had managed to not only survive, but to keep the whole horde from imploding. Once the bloodbath moved into the hive's lower levels, things became a blur. Orks rampaged through factories and hab blocks, and the fighting devolved into brutal door-to-door slaughter. I skittered through alleys and rubble, doing whatever I could, tossing a looted grenade here, tripping a fleeing Hume there, pointing out snipers on rooftops. My keen Grot eyes earning me some thanks from a Daka boy, who promptly blew the snipers to red mist. If any orc questioned why a Grot was giving pointers, the results spoke for themselves too quickly. And the orc in question usually forgot I was a Grot at all in the excitement of a new target. In a few hours, the great hive city of WAAAGH fell silent except for the chants of victorious orcs and the crackle of flames. Bodies, green and pink alike, littered the avenues. The central plaza was a scene of utter devastation and glory, and somewhere amidst that, standing on a toppled statue of the Emperor, the orcs had pulled it down for a bit of fun, I found myself still alive. Bruised, splattered in gore, mostly not my own, thankfully, and absolutely exhausted, but alive. As the dust settled, the orcs started gathering to take stock. Normally, this is when the Warboss would bellow a victory cry, rally the boys, maybe smash a few heads to remind everyone who's boss, and get them looting in an orderly, orky fashion. But Grimsnaga was ash. One by one, orcs looked around, realizing the boss was gone. I saw some uneasy shuffling. A few of the bigger knobs, those who hadn't killed each other in the earlier spat, regrouped, eyeing each other and the horde. The largest of them, Uzgrok, the one who had taken up my call, stomped to the forefront, blood dripping from a dozen wounds. He clanged his axe on his breastplate to get attention. "Right, listen up. Grimsnaga's gone to Mork's realm," he growled. "We need a new boss." "Oi, Uzzy," another knob sneered, cracking his knuckles. "You think you's the boss now? I broke more Yumi skulls than you today." Already they were baring fangs at each other, that dangerous glint in their eyes. The pattern was about to repeat, a bossless horde turning on itself. My tongue felt swollen in my mouth. Would I dare interject again? Once had been crazy enough. Before I could even decide, fate intervened one more time. Or maybe it was that touch of cunning I had set in motion earlier, paying dividends. See, Warboss Grimsnaga had a pet, a particularly vicious attack squig named Mangler. A giant red-furred ball of muscle, teeth, and bad attitude, Mangler had been trained to accompany Grimsnaga into battle, gnawing kneecaps and swallowing faces on command. During the chaos of the explosion and fight, I hadn't seen Mangler, but apparently the squig had been busy. I later found a half-eaten Ogren corpse and figured old Mangler had been feasting somewhere. Now, as Uzgrok and the other knob squared off, there came a snarling, gurgling roar from a heap of debris. With a terrifying bound, Mangler the attack squig leapt into the open, landing right between the two would-be bosses. He was splattered in gore, eyes glowing with feral rage. Squigs are always hungry and generally angry, and this one had just lost its master. It was in a mood. Gah! Squig! Uzdrock barely had time to yelp before Mangler lunged and chomped down on him. This beast was the size of an orc torso with the jaw power of a steel trap. It clamped onto Uzdrock's leg and ripped him off his feet. The other knob, the sneery one, reflexively whacked Mangler with a club, but that only drew the squig's attention his way. In a flash, the squig released Uzdrock, who was howling and clutching a stump where his leg used to be, and pounced on Mr. Sneery Knob. They went down in a thrashing heap, the knob screaming obscenities as the squig's fangs found purchase. In a few gruesome seconds, the would-be boss's screams gurgled into silence as Mangler tore his throat out. The squig raised its bloodied snout, gulping down a chunk of green flesh, and roared triumphantly. Every orc present paused. Some laughed. Hey, that squig's got him. Others looked on appreciatively. Orcs love a good show of violence, even at their own expense. But all of them understood the symbolism instinctively. Gork, or Mork, wasn't happy with their squabbling. The squig, going berserk on the nearest loudmouth, was practically a sign from the gods, shut up and fight, ya gits. I was standing not far off, close enough that, to my horror, Mangler's bloodshot eyes now swung toward me. Perhaps I had been near Grimsnaga often enough, as his ammo runt and boot cleaner, that Mangler remembered my scent. Or maybe the beast just saw another small target. Either way, in that tense moment, the massive squig stomped toward me, growling low. I froze. Despite all I'd been through that day, I figured this was it, eaten by a squig that used to belong to me boss. How poetic. But here's where a bit of kindness or pragmatism paid off. See, I was the one who usually fed Mangler back in camp. Grimsnaga didn't have the patience to keep his pet fed and clean. That fell to us grots. And I had always made sure to toss an extra bone or juicy squig bit Mangler's way when I could, just so he'd maybe not take my arm off one day. As Mangler loomed over me, dripping green blood and drool, I did the only thing I could. I raised my hand slowly with a treat. Well, it wasn't exactly a treat. I had no squig snacks on me. But I did have a hunk of charred meat that I'd picked up off the ground in the aftermath. Don't judge. A grot learns to scavenge anything that might be useful. Mangler's keen nose twitched. He sniffed at the offering. Good boy, Mangler, I cooed as steadily as I could, my voice barely above a whisper now, drowned by the murmurs of orcs around us. The squig sniffed again, then, chomp, snapped the meat from my hand, nearly taking my fingers with it. I yelped and fell on my backside. Mangler chewed twice, swallowed, then let out a contented wet belch. And just like that, the giant murder squig plopped its foul behind down beside me, as calm as an old hound. Its beady eyes scanned the crowd of boys as if daring anyone else to make a fuss. The orcs stared back, half amazed, half amused. A couple of them even chuckled. One I heard mutter, "Ha! The runt's got his squig well trained." I blinked. Was I alive? I was. More than that, by sheer accident, I looked like I had tamed the beast. Truth be told, Mangler was just momentarily full and remembered I was the food bringer. But to the orc perspective, a squig that just chomped 2 tough knobs now sat obediently at a grot's side. That simply does not happen. It was, in their eyes, practically magic. Maybe the little git had Mork's favor after all. In the heavy silence, with every orc watching, I knew I had yet another slim moment to seize. So I did. I clambered back to my feet, trying to look a lot braver than I felt, and I climbed up onto Mangler's back. The squig hardly noticed. He was busy licking a spot of Uzdrock's blood off his paw. From atop the squig, I actually had a decent height advantage. Suddenly, I was at eye level, more or less, with many of the boys. I spat out a glob of dust and addressed the horde. Any of you gits got other ideas who's boss now? I shouted, hands on my hips, like I saw Grimsnaga do 100 times. My voice cracked only a little. Hey, I was new at this commanding thing. I gave Mangler a pat on the neck. He snarled right on cue, stringy flesh still hanging from his jaws. A few boys took an involuntary step back. I could almost see the thoughts floating through their thick skulls. The squig ate the challengers. Maybe. Maybe that Grot's tougher than he looks. One of the surviving nobs, a scarred brute named Gorsnick, raised his gun uncertainly, not exactly aiming it, more a reflex. Mangler immediately locked eyes on him and let out a deep growl. Gorsnick quickly lowered his weapon, trying to look nonchalant about it. We hear ya, boss," he grunted, spitting out a wad of blood, someone else's, presumably. "What's the orders?" I had to suppress the shock and wild glee rising in me chest at those words. Boss, orders. Holy squig, they were actually doing it. They were acknowledging me, at least provisionally. I realized then I stood at a precipice. One wrong word, one sign of weakness, and they'd remember I was just a measly grot and tear me apart. But if I played along, kept this momentum of awe and confusion going, maybe, just maybe, I could ride it. I cleared my throat and did my best to deepen my voice. In truth, it came out a bit reedy, but none laughed, praise Gawk. "First order, loot and fortify this place," I barked. Simple, sensible. Any warboss would say the same after taking a city. The boys needed no encouragement. At the word loot, a cheer went up. Wrecked Lehman Russ tanks were already being swarmed by mech boys and scrapball grots, stripping them for parts. Orks love nothing better after a good fight than grabbing all the shiny stuff. Good. That'd keep 'em busy and happy for a bit. Grab yourselves some teeth off them hummy corpses and fix up any flash gear you find. I continued, trying to emulate the gruff, confident tone of a boss. We ain't done fighting, not by a long shot. There'll be more hummies coming and we's gonna be ready, right? A chorus of, "Right," and "You got it, boss," answered. Throats began to chant, "WAAAGH! Grog!" One called. I guess the sound of Grot was a bit demeaning, so some had already decided I should be Boss Grog, or Grogwort, or something. Fine by me. Call me what you like so long as you listen. Others took up various names. I heard Runt Smasher and De Green Gobbo in the mix. The boys were clearly trying to coin a fitting title for the bizarre sight of a Gretchin leading them. That, and they were just riled up and euphoric from victory. Morale was surging now that they had an obvious focal point again, even if that focal point was perched on a drooling squig. Orks are weirdly flexible when it comes to leadership. Kill their boss and another takes over. No hard feelings as long as there's a boss. Usually that boss is the biggest brute around, but in this case, well, the squig at my side helped sell the image of might, I suspect. As the mob dispersed to carry out my orders, an electric thrill shot through me. I did it. Hell's teeth. I actually did it. I had somehow gone from being a nobody, worse, a slave, to the one giving the orders that mattered. Sure, it might only last until one of these boys got ambitious or hungry enough, but every second it continued was like standing on the edge of a knife and not yet falling off. Exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. My legs felt like they might give out, but I kept my posture straight on Mangler's back, chin up, doing my best impression of an orc boss surveying his domain. Inside, I was a confused jumble of relief, triumph, and what the zog do I do now? Looting went on till nightfall. I let the boys have their fun. A wise boss knows when to stay out of the way of his boys' natural urges. Meanwhile, I skulked off to what had been the Imperial Governor's mansion, or what was left of it. There I had a moment to collect myself and think. Orc battles are loud and furious, but the aftermath can be eerily quiet once all the screaming stops. In that mansion's ruined balcony, overlooking the smoldering hive, I truly felt the weight of what had happened settling on my scrawny shoulders. I was effectively in charge of an entire orc horde. Me, a weaselly little Grot who, just that morning, was scouring pots and picking his nose in the shadows. The enormity of it threatened to turn my bowels to water if I dwelt on it. So I did what any sensible orc leader would do. I grabbed a flagon of fungus wine from the governor's stash. Didn't know Humies drank fungus wine. Maybe the previous boss already looted this place some. Took a swig. Blech, too sweet, Humie taste. And turned my thoughts to practical matters. The boys would look to me for guidance. If I faltered, I was dead. If I led poorly, I was dead. If I showed weakness, definitely dead. The trick would be not to let him think I was weak or clueless. But how? I couldn't exactly wrestle every challenger into submission. Physically, I was still the runty Grot I'd always been. Not even Mangler could protect me from a determined mob or a clever assassin forever. I had to rely on what I'd always relied on. Me, wits. I needed to cement my position with cunning and make it seem like strength. Fate gave me a boon that night in the form of a hulking silhouette that darkened the mansion doorway. I nearly jumped out of me skin, thinking some knob had come to quietly snip my throat. But it was one of the big mech boys. Kitzcrack was his name, the master of machinery in Grimsnaga's WAAAGH. He loomed there in patchwork mega armor, his welding mask pushed up on his forehead, eyes squinting at me through the gloom. On his shoulder clung his little pet Grot assistant, Fix-It. Poor little Zog was trembling. He knew what I was, and probably expected Kitzcrack to twist my head off. "Oi, boss," the mech rumbled uncertainly. He had a habit of drooling engine oil. A black slick dripped from his lip as he spoke. "We're getting the force field generators and cannons set up around the city like ye wanted. But, we need to know where you want the scrap from the loot piles. Normally, old Grimsnaga kept the best bits for hisself. So, who gets first pick? The spoils distribution." A critical point. Many a warboss gets himself shanked in the night if he hogs too much loot or gives too little to his lieutenants. I might have been new to being in charge, but I'd observed more than most Grots about orc culture. I gave a sly grin, or so I imagined it, likely looked more like a nervous grimace, but Kitzcrack wasn't the best at reading expressions anyway. "The boys fought hard," I replied, trying to keep me voice steady and gruff. "Let 'em have their fun. Every knob in Big Hung can take a share. Just save some of the best gubbins for building us more fighting gear. And you, mech, you get any shiny techno? Gubbins that might make our shooters shootier or our trucks faster. We're gonna need 'em." Kitzcrack's eyes widened in surprise, not at the generosity, though orc bosses aren't known for sharing, but at the fact I explicitly told him to snag tech rather than teef or booze. "So you don't want a pile of loot for yourself first?" he asked, scratching his head with a wrench the size of my leg. I shrugged from atop Mangler, who had followed at my heel like a loyal squig dog. "What I want," I said, improvising, "is to keep this WAAAGH going and win bigger fights. We get stronger, then the loot rolls in by the cartload, innit? Get me boys new guns, get me new fighters, and I'll have all the loot I could want when we take the next world." The mech broke into a tusky grin. That's right. More Daka. Heh heh. I like how ya think, boss." He gave a greasy salute and was about to tromp off, but then paused. He lowered his voice, or at least attempted a whisper, which for an orc mech is like a normal person speaking volume. Boss? I just want to say some of the lads was talking. Bit confused, like having a grot for a boss. But I told him. I said maybe Mork himself's got a hand in this, 'cause it's right cunning, innit? No one expects a grot to lead, so we got all the element of surprise and all that. Plus you keep us in line and keep us tinkin'. I always said, brute force is fine, but a bit of know-what goes a long way. I sat there atop my squig, momentarily speechless. An orc, a mech boy no less, basically just praised my leadership. I could have fallen off Mangler in shock. Instead, I just nodded sagely. "Too right, mech. You follow me lead, I'll make sure you get to build the biggest, shootiest machines you ever dreamed of." I leaned forward and added in a conspiratorial tone, "I ain't gonna stand in the way of your fancy inventions like old Grimsnaga did. In fact, I encourage it. If it makes a bigger boom or crushes a bigger tank, I want it." Kidscrack's face split in a tusky grin from ear to ear. "Ha! Music to me ears, boss. I got some ideas already. I'll get to work straight away." And off he went, nearly skipping. An odd sight, a huge orc practically skipping, but mech boys are an odd breed. His Grot assistant, Fixit, shot me a quick toothy smile and a thumbs up. We Grots gotta silently cheer each other on in these situations, then clung tight as the mech barreled back to his workshop area. I exhaled deeply. That was a crucial ally won. If the big mech was happy, he'd churn out better kit for the boys and for me, and he'd be less likely to entertain any plots by dissident nobs. A content mech is worth his weight in teeth. Plus, orcs respect their mechs, so his buy-in indirectly bolstered mine. That night, under the cracked moons and amid the bonfires of celebration, I made sure to show my face, or rather my silhouette atop Mangler, just enough to remind everyone I was still in charge, and still protected by a terrifying ball of fangs. When a drunk Bad Moon's knob got too rowdy and suggested tossing the new boss in the air for laughs, Mangler literally bit his arm off at the elbow. The knob's howl of pain turned into laughter as he staggered off to the pain boy. Orcs love a good injury story. "Ha ha, the runty boss's squig's a mean one," I heard others guffaw. "Serves old Goldtooth right for mouthing off." I didn't even have to lift a finger. Between giving out ample loot and having a monster pet that took care of hecklers, my first day as a Warboss passed without any further attempts on my life. I curled up to sleep that night in Grimsnaga's former quarters, a crude throne room in the hive's central spire, with Mangler curled at the door, his snores rumbling like a content volcano. I kept one eye open, of course. I'm not stupid. A Grot boss who sleeps too soundly ends up strangled with his own guts. But I did get some rest, clutching a loaded shooter under my arm. The last thing I recall thinking before I dozed off was, if I live to see tomorrow, I might actually pull this off. Tomorrow came, and with it the clamor of 100 tasks demanding my attention. Being boss is hard work. Who knew? At first light, Grots and orcs alike swarmed to get my say-so on things. "Boss, the boys want to start a fight pit for fun. We allowed to squabble a bit?" "Yes, but make sure no one important dies," I told them, "and winner gets an extra squig." "Boss, we found Humie survivors hiding in the underhive. Can we eat 'em?" "Sure, roast 'em up. Maybe we can make 'em into squig feed." "Oi, boss, this Grot stole me teeth necklace." That from a burly orc pointing at a cowering Grot. I fixed the thief with a stern glare and snapped, "Give 'em back, you git, or I'll let Ripper the Squig chew your butt next." The Grot practically fainted, spitting the teeth out of his mouth. He'd tried to swallow them. The orc laughed so hard he forgot to thump the Grot and wandered off, content with his recovered loot. Piece by piece, I dealt with these trivialities, all the while trying to project that I knew exactly what I was doing. The more I acted like it was natural for them to ask me, the more they actually did. Greenskins are funny that way. Half of what they accept is based on confidence and spectacle. By midday, I was strutting, on Mangler's back or flanked by two intimidating knob bodyguards who decided life was easier under me than trying to fight me, through the captured hive, barking orders to organize our next moves. We had a lot to do: repair vehicles, round up all the remaining ammo, and prepare for inevitable counterattacks. Sure enough, the Humies weren't done. A few days later, Imperial reinforcements arrived, a regiment of fresh guardsmen, plus armored columns and even a Knight Titan, one of those big stompy war machines piloted by Noble Gat in fancy armor. They expected to find a disorganized mob of leaderless orcs they could easily cleanse. Instead, they found a fortified hive city bristling with captured defense guns, guns I had ordered our mech boys to rig back up. We greeted the Humie reinforcements with a wall of Daka from their own damned fort. Ha! You should have seen the looks on those tank commanders' faces through my magnoculars when the hive's macro cannons, decorated with orc glyphs and repainted in bright red and blue, opened fire on them. They probably expected those cannons to be slagged or unmanned. Instead, they were crewed by gleeful Gretchin I'd assigned to the task. Grots love any chance to operate machinery, even more so to blow up Humies from a safe distance. The Grots cackled as they unleashed the stolen arsenal, and I made sure a couple of boys were with them to keep them on task and enjoy the fireworks. Under that unexpected barrage, the Imperial offensive faltered badly. By the time their night suit stepped over the ruins to return fire, we Orks had poured out in a counterattack. It was a beautiful sight, boys charging not in a haphazard mass, as they would have under Grimm's Naga, but in a half-coordinated wave, using cover and everything. See, I did nudge them a bit. "Spread out, ya gits. Don't bunch up for the big shooty thing," I had yelled, pointing at the Knight and its massive thermal cannon. And by Mork, they actually listened, mostly. Or maybe they just naturally were more cautious after seeing what organized defense could do. Either way, our casualties were way lower than the Humies expected as we closed in. The Knight, a towering, elegant engine of war, started laying waste, blowing apart wagons and incinerating clumps of boys with each blast of its cannon or sweep of its giant chainsword. It stomped forward, each footstep crushing an orc or two into paste. Normally, an orc horde would just keep suicidally flinging itself at such a behemoth until either it or they went down. But here's where some cunning paid off. I had anticipated something like this. Hard not to notice the giant Knight lander dropping off that big shiny mech on the horizon. So I arranged a little surprise. Right as the Knight waded into the city outskirts, a section of ground suddenly gave way beneath its left leg. Turns out, while the Humies were assembling for attack, I had ordered a team of comandandos, sneaky blood axe boys. Thankfully, we had a mob of them, who defected from an earlier battle. Nobody trusts them much, but I sure found a use, to tunnel under the boulevard and rig it with whatever explosives we had left. It was a dicey gamble, could have been discovered or detonated too early. But Mork must have been smirking on me that day. The Knight's weight did the trick. Down it went, one leg plunging into a sinkhole of shattered plascrete and explosions. It didn't topple completely, but it sure got stuck at an awkward angle. In a flash, like squigs on fresh meat, our orcs swarmed the immobilized Knight. Storm boys with rocket packs whooshed in, planting charges on its carapace. Tankbuster boys popped up from windows and ruined buildings, launching rockets that splashed the knight's void shields and began to crack its armor. The metal giant thrashed, firing wildly. One desperate blast turned a whole orc mob to ash, but it was too late. With a deafening crump, one of the storm boys' melter bombs blew the knight's left knee joint apart. The noble pilot tried to activate jump jets or whatever escape trick those suits have, but just then a lucky cannon shot from one of our looted artillery pieces slammed right into the knight's torso. The shield had flickered out by then, and the explosion gutted the big war machine from the inside. In a glorious, fiery collapse, the knight went down on its back, a burning wreck. The orc roar that went up at that moment was like an earthquake of pure joy. If there was any lingering doubt about my leadership, it got buried in that victorious howl. Because while the boys didn't exactly hear my cunning plan spoken aloud, I had kept it hush with the commandos. They sure saw the results. To them, it was just more proof that under this weird new boss, they were achieving outrageous things, outwitting humies, even. And orcs don't mind outwitting humies, as long as it leads to an even bigger boom. The surviving guardsmen fled in terror shortly after their grand knight fell. We hunted them down for sport over the next day or so, until none were left except prisoners we kept for amusements and squig food. Hive Rock Dash was firmly ours, and our WAAAGH now effectively controlled the entire planet. In mere days, I went from anonymous Grot likely to die horribly to planetary conqueror. Not bad, eh? Grimslug. That's what some started calling our horde, after a name I half-accidentally gave in a boast. "We're gonna leave this place grim and slugged," I said, or something like that, and the boys thought I was coining my name. It ain't what I would have picked. I fancied something like Warlord Mork's Left Hand or the Cunning Death. But you don't get to choose these things once orcs start chanting. So, WAAAGH, Grimslug we became, and me. I was now Warboss Grimslug, apparently. Could be worse. At least they dropped the runt and Grot from my monikers publicly. Though I did hear the odd mutter of runt boss from some cynical flash git here and there. Always out of my earshot, of course. Interestingly, more and more orcs began to enjoy the novelty of my rule. We were winning, weren't we? And fast. The boys got to fight plenty and also live to see the next fight, which for orcs is a surprisingly welcome outcome. Some of the thicker ones didn't even realize I was a Grot half the time, I think. They saw the boss pole I now carried. I had one of the mech boys make me a custom boss pole with shiny bits and even a mechanized loudspeaker, so I could shout orders on the battlefield in a booming voice. They saw the giant squig under me. They saw the flashy gear I started to don, looted a fine power sword from the dead commissar and had it refit to my size, plus a custom mega blaster crafted by Kitscrack that strapped to my arm. A Grot-sized death ray, ha! All these trappings made me look quite boss-like. Sure, I was still a fraction of their height, but in a fight, symbols matter. And results? Oh, results matter a lot. With the planet hours, my thoughts turned to the stars. Orcs don't sit around on a victory for long. There's always a bigger brawl out there calling. The war energy was surging. I could feel it in my bones. The boys were getting antsy already, after only a week of relative downtime. They'd started engaging in rowdy contests, squig races, headbutt challenges, even a who can shoot the farthest squig out of a cannon competition. The winner made it clear over the hive spire. We all had a good laugh watching that poor squig sail through the stratosphere. These antics were all in good fun, but it was clear, if I didn't direct this energy outward soon, it'd implode inward on me. Orcs are like a pot of fungus brew. Keep a lid on too long without letting off steam, and it'll blow up in your face. Conveniently, for me plan, an opportunity came a-knockin'. Our weird boy. Did I mention we had one? Every big orc horde has at least a couple of those batty shamans who soak up the psychic WAAAGH energy and do freaky stuff. Ours was a loon by the name of WAAAGH to be precise, a bug-eyed orc with crackling fingers and the habit of talking to mushrooms. Under Grim Snaga, he mostly kept to himself, occasionally frying an unlucky grot with a misfired psychic blast when the WAAAGH energy got too much. Well, WAAAGH came to see me, or rather, he shuffled and twitch-stepped his way into my throne room, escorted by two knobs who looked glad to be rid of him. His eyes were literally glowing green, wisps of energy dancing around his oversized cranium. WAAAGH prostrated himself. That was new. Apparently, even weird boys can sense a shift in authority. And said in a reverent, spittle-spraying lisp, "Boss Grimslug, the gods speak. Gork and Mork be sending visions they are." Now, I'm always skeptical when someone claims direct line to Gork and Mork. Orc gods ain't exactly subtle in their messaging usually. They prefer the medium of club to head. But I leaned forward, intrigued. "What did you see, WAAAGH?" The weird boy's eyes rolled back and he started shaking. In a deep sing-song voice, quite unlike his usual ramble, he proclaimed, "I seen a great green trail across the stars, a path of blood and thunder. I seen worlds burning, boss, human worlds, and at the head of it all, a tiny figure wreathed in black, riding a red beast carrying a spear of lightning." At this, I swear a current of green sparks jolted from WAAAGH's outstretched hands. The nearby knobs jumped. My own skin tingled. The little hairs on my neck, all three of them, stood up. Tiny figure on a beast, spear of lightning. It didn't take a genius to guess he was describing me on Mangler and maybe my shiny power sword crackling with energy. The orcs gathered, I had a few attendants around, murmured in awe. "That sounds like Boss Grimslug," someone whispered. "Mork's giving him a thumbs up, he is," said another, wide-eyed. WAAAGH wasn't done. "Division ain't finished," he howled, twitching. "I sees a great big battle in the stars, bigger than any fight. I hears the laughter of the gods, and they be laughing in delight, boss, at our war. I see humies kneeling and burning and running, and I see—" Here he paused, drooling slightly, then in a frighteningly high tone shrieked, "I see the runt on the throne of skulls." With that, WAAAGH promptly keeled over, smoke wisping from his ears. He'd knocked himself out with his own vision. Weird boys. Go figure. Well, you can imagine the effect this little prophetic performance had on the lads. If there was any reluctance or doubt left about my leadership, WAAAGH's vision pretty much blew it to the moons. Orcs are deeply superstitious, see? A dramatic prophecy from a weird boy carries serious weight, and one that basically said, "This here small boss is chosen by Gork and Mork to lead us to the greatest fights ever." Well, that's like getting an official stamp of approval from the green gods themselves. I could not have planned it better had I tried, and trust me, I hadn't tried. One does not simply make a weird boy have a vision unless you want to end up a pile of ash. I made a note to treat WAAAGH extra nice. That is, not feed him a knuckle sandwich like some bosses do when weird boys spout what they don't want to hear. He'd just done me a huge favor. So when the boys came to me now, clamoring, "Where we going next, boss? Who we gonna crump now?" I had an answer ready and divine validation to boot. I assembled the horde in the former central square of the hive, or what remained of it. We had to clear some rubble and bodies first. Tens of thousands of green faces looked up at me. Orc war banners flapped in the toxic breeze. The engines of our patched-together trucks and wagons revved eagerly. Above, in orbit, hung the ominous shape of our space hulk. Oh yes, we had one now, or rather we always did. The Ork cruiser fleet Grimsnaga arrived with had summoned a space hulk that drifted in system soon after we took the planet. With meek Kitzcrack working feverishly to make it space-worthy, it promised us passage to the stars without relying on those rickety cruisers. Not that we didn't patch those up too. Everything was set for the next stage of the WAAAGH. I stood atop a looted Imperial tank hull, gutted for parts, but it made a fine stage. Mangler sat at my side, and behind me I'd arrayed a rather fearsome honor guard, a mix of hulking nobs in mega armor and even a few kilocans piloted by Grots. I figured why not stick a Grot in a stompy tin suit as part of my entourage. Symbolically neat, yeah? I raised high a weapon I'd taken as a trophy. The fallen knight's massive severed chain blade tooth mounted on a pole like a spear. It crackled with some leftover energy for show. The horde fell into a hush. Well, a relative hush. Orks are always muttering or farting or something, but it was quiet enough. I gave the loudspeaker on my boss pole a thump, and it squealed to life. Time for my big boss speech. "Boys," I began, my voice echoing across the plaza. "We've had a good scrap year, ain't we?" A thunder of approval greeted that understatement. Orks beat their chests, choppers clanged on shields. I let it die down. "We smashed this world good. Humies didn't know what hit 'em. We sent 'em running and dying all over. You done me proud, lads." Truth be told, the Orks did themselves proud, but a boss who shares credit gets loyalty. Not that I planned it that academically. I was genuinely impressed by how ferocious they were. "But," I continued, "this ain't the end. What do we want?" "More fighting," came the unified roar. It shook dust from the ruins, I swear. Some mechs let off celebratory gunfire. A cloud of spores from all the Orks spitting and yelling drifted into the sky like a green haze. My spine tingled with the collective energy, that weird psychic warmth you feel in your gut when a WAAAGH is about to really get going. "Too right, more fighting," I bellowed back. "And where's the best fights?" I swept an arm to the heavens. "Out there." Every Ork head turned upward, as if imagining all the worlds beyond we hadn't yet smashed. "The Imperium of mankind," I sneered, using the Humies term with exaggerated disdain. "Thinks it owns the stars. Billions of 'em, all waiting for a good crumpin'. Wow, Grimslug ain't gonna stop at one stinking world. We's gonna take this show on the road. A grand tour of destruction." They loved that. An Ork mob loves promises of endless war, even more than the war they just finished. And thanks to WAAAGH's timely vision, they believed destiny itself was guiding us. Gork and Mork themselves sent a message, I declared, pointing at WAAAGH, who sat cross-legged nearby, still rubbing his head. "Tell 'em what you saw, WAAAGH." The weird boy jerked as everyone looked at him. He croaked out, I saw the boss leading us to the biggest fights ever. The gods was laughing and cheering." Cue another blast of "wah" from the crowd. Some Orks were practically foaming at the mouth with excitement, smashing their weapons together. That strange gestalt psychic field, the WAAAGH energy, surged tangibly. I felt a momentary dizziness as it washed through the horde, magnifying their brutality and, interestingly, their belief in me. I'd later ponder that perhaps the Orks' own psychic field was reinforcing my authority beyond just physical means. Orks believe who's boss, so that guy gets bossier, bigger, stronger. It's how big war bosses keep growing. But I'll get to that in a bit. I jabbed my claw finger to the sky again. "So here's what we gonna do. Load up on dem ships that hulk in orbit, every truck and con and wagon. We's going on a galactic hunt. We'll hit the nearest Humie systems like a fist to the face. We'll burn their fortresses, crash their capitals, and make every puny emperor kissin' git out. Dare remember the day a war led by a Grot smashed them to pieces. I couldn't resist a bit of pride there. The Orks roared in approval regardless. Some didn't even register the led by a Grot part as unusual anymore, or if they did, they found it all the more hilarious and awesome. The myth was building. Me, the runty little boss who was somehow more orky than a lot of orcs. I'd overheard some boys in camp one night arguing whether I was actually a Grot or just a strangely small orc. "He's just a youth who never grew, I tell ya," one insisted. Another snarled, "Nah, I seen him up close. He's got the weedy long nose and ears of a Grot. But maybe he's like, I don't know, possessed by Gork, or Mork, or both." They all laughed and drank to that. Dumb as it sounded, that conversation gave me confidence. They weren't plotting to off me. They were trying to justify following me in their own way. As long as they could rationalize it, God's influence, special runt, etc., they'd go along. Fine by me. Whatever helps them sleep at night without reaching for a knife with my name on it. Anyway, back to the speech. I wrapped it up by raising Grimsnaga's old boss pole. I had salvaged it and had it carried behind me as a symbol. It was festooned with fresh Humi skulls now. Today, this world. Tomorrow, many worlds. We'll bash and the smash and crash across the stars. And when we's done, when the whole sector's red with blood and burning, we'll find the biggest fight of all and make even the gods jealous. I thrust my fist up. "Who's with me, boys?" The response was deafening. "Wah!" echoed over and over as thousands of orcs saluted with their weapons, stomped their feet, and worked themselves into a frenzy. I'm pretty sure the sheer psychic resonance of their war cry killed a few low-flying birds overhead. They just dropped out of the sky, cooked by the collective hate and joy. Weird boy WAAAGH was dancing in circles, glowing like a lightning rod. I thought he might blow his top, literally, but two minder Grots doused him with a bucket of squig water to keep him stable. From then on, it was a whirlwind of activity. We loaded our spoils and war machines onto the Hulk and accompanying spacecraft. That space Hulk, dubbed the Big Greenie by the mechs, was a gargantuan amalgamation of rock and wreckage, but Kitzcrack swore he could guide it through the warp. Our fleet wasn't fancy, but it was ours, rusty kill cruisers, clanking rock dropships, and the Hulk, all ready to carry a greenskin tide to fresh killing fields. Before we left the planet, I took one last look at the smoking horizon of Hive Rock Dash. In a rare moment of reflection, don't laugh, Grots can be reflective, usually just about where our next meal's coming from or how not to die, but still, I felt something almost sentimental. This world had been the site of my rise, the first place where a Gretchin stood up and said, "I'm in charge," and wasn't immediately squashed. We'd turned it into an orc paradise, meaning it was a right proper mess, of course. Part of me wondered what the Humies would think once word got out. Their high-up governors and inquisitors and whatnot, they'd probably dismiss it as a fluke or desperately hide the fact that one of their worlds fell to a Grot-led WAAAGH so morale doesn't plummet. Let 'em wonder. The longer they underestimate me, the better surprise we give 'em. I ordered our remaining spore shrooms to be spread wide as we departed, to make sure the orcoid life on this planet would keep regenerating. An orc conquest isn't complete unless you seed the place with the fungi that'll spawn more of our kind for ages to come. Even if we left, this world would produce feral orcs and squigs for centuries, a nice little slap in the face to any Imperials hoping to recolonize. Soon we were off. Picture a swarm of colossal, ramshackle ships leaving orbit in an organized chaos only orcs can manage. Fire belched from engines that by all rights should not function. They ran on our mech boys' faith and duct tape, I think. The space hulk, the Big Greenie, lurched free of the planet's gravity, a mountain of scrap and stone that glinted with the fires of 1,000 engine exhausts. Within it, tens of thousands of orcs, Gretchin, squigs, and whatever else we picked up, hollered and drank and fought minor scuffles to pass the time. I had taken over the Hulk's bridge. Well, it was more like an amalgamated cavern with some looted Navy sensoriums and a big viewing bay. The freebooter captain of the Hulk, one Captain Skabag, was a surly big orc with an eye patch, but he bent the knee quick when faced with the unified front of my knob guard and a clear scenario. Ride with us and get the first pick of loot on many worlds, or get your head ventilated and have a Grot captain appointed in your place. He chose wisely. Now, warp travel on an orc space hulk is a nightmare even under the best circumstances. Geller fields flicker, random demonic apparitions pop in to say hello, usually to be eaten or shot by an orc who thinks they look like fun. And the navigation is, shall we say, imprecise. But orcs have a peculiar advantage. Their gestalt psychic field helps them collectively weather the warp in ways the brainier races might not. We essentially bullhead our way through the sea of souls by trial and error, and somehow it mostly works out. I remember during one warp jump, a horde of gibbering pink horrors. Those are minor chaos demons, I think, manifested in the lower decks. By the time I got word, our boys had already rounded them up and were betting teeth on squig-eating contests. Apparently, the demons tasted like cotton candy and exploded in puffs of smoke if they laughed too hard. The orcs found it hilarious. That mini-incursion only fueled the party. Gork, bless their simple hearts, what would drive an Imperial crew to madness was just a jolly diversion for us. I kept busy during those voyages. Between breaking up or encouraging, depending, the occasional brawl and planning our next strikes, I also took some time to improve myself. Remember how I mentioned orcs grow when they fight and win? Well, guess what? That strange physiology doesn't wholly ignore grots either. I wasn't exactly becoming an orc, but I noticed when I looked in a scrap of mirror that my frame was a bit less scrawny, my muscles, such as they were, a bit corded. It could have been just better nutrition. I got to eat proper meals now, mostly squig meat and stolen amasec liquor, instead of moldy crusts. But I suspect it was also the effect of the WAAAGH energy. The boys all fervently believed in our crusade. Some truly did believe I was chosen by Mork. That does things, weird things, in the warp and to reality. By the second world we hit, I could heft a chopper nearly the size of a boy's, which previously would have been unthinkable. I could roar commands louder and with more bass in me voice, to the point some slow orcs in battle actually mistook me for a little knob until they saw me. And the most telling sign, my skin, always a sallow, grotty green, started turning a shade darker, richer, more orky. I was, for lack of a better word, thriving. Now don't get me wrong, I was still short. I didn't shoot up in height like some mushroom miracle, but I must have gained a few inches. One day I caught a glimpse of old Bograt, one of the taller grots from my former run-third pen, and shockingly I was eye level with him now. He blinked in confusion, not sure if he was shrinking or I was growing. Ha! If only me mum, not that grots have mums, could see me now. So there we were, carving a bloody swath through the sector. Our second target was an Imperial agri-world called Pellucid, or Pellucidar, something like that. Mainly fields, livestock, a few million farmers guarded by a token PDF force. Hardly worth recounting in detail. It was more a live-fire exercise for my boys. We descended on the plains like a green storm. Honestly, the battle was more of a rout. Those poor sods hadn't seen a Xenos in centuries, let alone a full WAAAGH. We razed a dozen cities, well, more like big towns, in a week. I did implement a cunning trick. We hit their communications first so they couldn't scream for help too soon. Commandos cut the Vox lines and astropathic spires. We crushed their silo bunkers and let the grain burn, partly because orcs love a good bonfire, and partly to draw any hiding defenders out. Nothing flushes out cowards like their food supply going up in flames. Some of the local militia tried a last stand at their planet's only spaceport. I gave them credit. They had a few old tanks and lots of heart. But heart doesn't count for much when a mob of speed freaks, the evil Sons clan boys who live for going fast, come barreling across your flanks in looted half-tracks, guns blazing. We slaughtered them by nightfall. I personally did one notable thing there. Detonated their one macro cannon by sending in a mob of sappers, grots with bombs strapped on, a classic if morbid orky tactic we call burner boys, except usually they're orcs volunteering. I convinced a bunch of grot rebels that this was their chance for posthumous glory. Mork, forgive me, but it worked. The explosion lit the sky for hours. In the glare, with orcs cheering and the earth shaking, I stood atop a wrecked Lehman Russ tank and let the boys take in the sight of another victory. It was on Pellucidar that I heard the lads start a new chant that both amused and humbled me. "Wah, runt boss! Wah, runt boss!" They meant it affectionately, mind, basically owning the fact that, yeah, I was a runt, but I was their runt and damned if we weren't winning. I didn't discourage it. Let 'em have their fun. It takes the sting out of outsiders mocking us if we mock the idea ourselves. In truth, any Humie who heard that chant probably died confused as anything. What in the abyss is a runt boss? They'd find out soon enough, the survivors who spread the tales. By the time we hit our third world, news of us was spreading through the Imperium and likely beyond. This was unavoidable. A WAAAGH makes noise, literally and figuratively. The next planet was not a soft target. It was a forge world. A place called Magnus Pharaoh, bristling with manufactorum cathedrals and legions of Skitarii. Those are machine-worshipping soldiers, all metal limbs and unblinking red eyes. Oh, and they had titans. Yes, plural. Those big war machines far larger and nastier than the knight we downed earlier. This was going to be a proper fight, the kind that either marks the peak of a WAAAGH or its doom. Frankly, some of the other war bosses in the sector, there were a few, not every orc was under my banner yet, would have avoided a forge world and gone for easier loot. Not me. I had a point to prove and an itch for spectacle. Also, deep down, I think I wanted to test just how far cunning and guts could take us. If a runt-led army could topple Magnus Pharaoh, then truly nothing was out of reach. Our initial assault on Magnus Pharaoh was pure insanity on both sides. The Forge world was orbited by defense platforms, spitting lasers and torpedoes. We lost a couple of cruisers on approach, with a few hundred boys aboard each. Painful, but orcs don't weep for fallen comrades. They just vow to avenge them. Using the Hulk as a battering ram, we smashed through the orbital ring. Pieces of burning station rained down on the planet. Then we commenced planetary drop. Thousands of orc rocks and landing craft hurled at the surface. Imagine being a tech priest on that planet, hearing prayers to your machine god when the sky fills with fire and hulks of metal screaming down. It was apocalyptic, even by orc standards. We hit the principal continent in dozens of places. The fighting was a blur of extremes. On one front, I recall, we had a mob of mega-armored knobs charging headlong into a formation of those Skitarii hoplites, disciplined cyborg soldiers with electro spears. The knobs smashed into them like a wrecking ball. Sparks flew, metal limbs and orc limbs both severed and flying. The Skitarii ranks fell back with mechanical precision, only for a second wave of boys to flank them thanks to a tunnel some grots had scouted through a sewage conduit. I orchestrated that little surprise, sending a grot tunnel team in advance to pop up behind the enemy lines. Worked a treat. The cyborgs got sandwiched and torn apart. Elsewhere, whole mobs of storm boys, orcs with jump packs, took to the skies, dueling with hovering tech priest gunships and servo automata. I stood atop a captured knight chassis. We looted and repaired that knight we downed, believe it or not. Kitzcrack and the mechs had fixed it to be our toy, with a grot wired in as the pilot. They nicknamed it Dahum Mi Stompa. From that vantage, I directed the flow, flashing signal lamps to guide mobs, using me loudspeaker to call out enemy weak points. You'd think in the chaos of such a war that those efforts would be lost, but trust me, orcs can pay attention when it's about where the best fight is. And as bullets and energy beams filled the air, I howled with the best of them, proper caught up in the frenzy while still trying to keep my head. Then came the Titans, 2 of them, striding across the Manufactorum plains. One was a warlord class, the biggest landwalker the Imperium fields, basically a walking fortress bristling with guns, and the other, a smaller Reaver class. They opened up with volcano cannons and missile pods, creating instant mayhem. Entire mobs disappeared in gouts of flame. An Orc Stompa, our equivalent war machine built from scrap and sheer orky will, got its head blown clean off by the warlord's first salvo. I'll admit a pang of fear hit my gut, seeing those god machines wade toward us. One step of the warlord's foot literally crunched an entire warband of snakebite orcs into jelly. This was beyond anything we'd faced so far. Orcs, however, do not know fear the way others do, and I guess at that moment neither did I. Because instead of ordering a retreat or anything sensible, I found myself shouting, "Get dose, big lads! Climb 'em! Bring 'em down!" And the orcs responded with an enthusiastic, "Wow!" Many boys were already way ahead of me, charging straight at the Titan's legs like enraged ants swarming a pair of elephants. A glorious, if messy, sight. The Reaver Titan was slightly ahead of the warlord, trying to clear space with a sweeping laser blaster that cut trenches in the ground full of charred orc bits. I saw an opening. The Reaver stepped right over a terrain feature I had noticed, an entire fuel depot complex. Likely Promethium tanks for the forges. I screamed into my calm loudener for our mechs to blow the charges. Earlier, I had indeed ordered some commandos to rig that Promethium depot with explosives, anticipating the Titans might walk by it if they came from the central citadel. Sure enough, kaboom! The depot went up in a chain of colossal fireballs. The Reaver Titan's left leg was engulfed in a pillar of flame as Promethium washed over it. Its void shields flared and died under the onslaught of that burning flood. Joints melted, servos seized. The gigantic machine faltered, struggling to keep balance. In that moment, dozens of orcs leapt onto it, literally scaling its now unshielded body like grot spider monkeys. They hacked away at sensor nodes, tore panels open to shove grenades inside, ripped down banners, and stabbed any soft bits they could find. With a groaning metallic wail, the Reaver Titan toppled forward, crashing to the ground. It squashed a bunch of our lads under it, sure, but did they care? Not a whit. Victorious howls went up as they began gutting the downed war engine. The poor crew inside were doubtless torn limb from limb in seconds. That left the big one. The warlord Titan. It had paused to unleash a furious barrage at its fallen comrades' killers, wiping out many orcs in an incandescent fury. But by pausing, it sealed its own fate. Because all those precious seconds our Hulk in orbit was aligning, and our weird boy, WAAAGH, was channeling all the wild WAAAGH energy from our boys below. I had orchestrated a little surprise from above. On my order, delivered via a beacon device we'd planted by sneaky Grot infiltrators in an earlier phase, the Space Hulk fired a concentrated salvo from an array of Gork's Eye orbital guns, basically cobbled together lance weapons the mechs had fixed onto the Hulk. At the same time, on the ground, WAAAGH and a circle of weird boys released a focused psychic blast, a green, crackling beam of pure WAAAGH that shot upward, then arced down onto the Titan like the finger of Gork himself. Orbital lance and psychic warp energy hit that warlord in concert. Its void shields, already straining from swarms of orc rockets and the general psychic background, collapsed. The beast's adamantium armor bubbled and vaporized where the orbital strike hit square in the torso. Then the warp beam smashed in. Reality itself sparked. I think a minor demon might have manifested inside the Titan's core for half a second, judging by the weird purple flash. Whatever it was, it caused the warlord's plasma reactor to overload. Seeing its death coming, I had just enough wits to scream into the calm, "All boys, fall back from the bigot." Surprisingly, many did. Self-preservation kicked in, aided by the fact the Titan started to glow unnaturally bright. In a final thunderous blast that probably could be seen from space, the warlord Titan went up like a mini-nova, taking a whole manufactorum complex with it. The shockwave flattened hundreds of our boys and surely wiped any surviving defenders in the vicinity. But when the smoke cleared, only charred legs of the Titan remained, sticking out of a crater. The greatest symbol of the Mechanicum's might on that world was no more. And above the din, as orcs picked themselves up in stunned glee, I started a chant over the Vox. "WAAAGH, Grimslug! WAAAGH, Grimslug!" They joined in with fervor. To them there was no distinction. Their efforts, my cunning plan, Mork's power, it was all one glorious victory belonging to our WAAAGH. Magnos Pharaoh fell within the week. We gave it a proper looting, albeit there was less celebration and more furious labor. The mechs practically wet themselves at the treasure trove of tech scrap available. We dragged a few of those Titan leg pieces into our ships. Who knew what we'd use them for, but I wasn't leaving such prize bits behind. The weird boys, after their heroic conflagration, a couple died from brain burst, unfortunately. Price of doing business with warp juice. Said they sensed a huge disturbance from our win. Possibly even the Emperor, that golden git on Terra, might have briefly furrowed his ancient brow at the psychic shock of a million orcs laughing victoriously. One can hope. It was at this point I noticed something else shift in the orc's attitude. No longer was there any talk of my size or species at all in a disparaging way. I was the Warboss, plain and simple, of one of the most successful wars they'd ever been a part of. Might makes right in orcdom, and we were making mighty right across the cosmos. Some of the boys even started copying some of my cunning tactics on their own. I heard of a knob arranging a decoy squig stampede to flank some enemies, and when asked where he got that idea, he reportedly grunted, "The boss does things sneaky-like sometimes, and it works, so why not me?" I dare say I was educating orcs. Horrifying thought for the Imperium, I'm sure. We were riding high on momentum and slaughter. World after world fell. Not all were cakewalks or legendary like the Forge fight, but each added to our legend. A fortress world garrisoned by Astra Militarum regiments tried to stall us. We cracked it open in a month, partially by turning their own sewers into rivers of chemical doom. thanks to some plague squigs we bred and flushed in. I called it Operation Stinky Surprise. A fleet of battle cruisers under some Imperial admiral caught up to us in transit once. We boarded half their ships, blew up the other half, and sent the admiral fleeing in an escape pod. We later found that pod. I let my Grot orderlies use the noble admiral as live target practice. Poetic, I think. As the months of constant warmongering rolled by, I realized my life had become a bizarre dream come true. Every time I expected the other shoe to drop, like, I don't know, the Orks waking up and saying, "Oi, why's we listening to this runt again?" It never did. If anything, success bred only more loyalty and fanaticism. Orks from all around flocked to our banners. Even other war bosses bent the knee or lost their heads and got replaced by ones more sympathetic. WAAAGH. Grimslug was becoming something unprecedented. Not the biggest WAAAGH ever. Not yet, anyway. We hadn't reached the scale of the truly galactic ones like Gazkul's invasions. But definitely the strangest and arguably the most disciplined greenskin force in living memory. Let's talk about that a second. Discipline in an orc army. I won't exaggerate. It wasn't like I had them marching in lockstep or doing parade drills. Blah, we'll leave that to the toy soldiers of the Imperium. But I did manage to instill a sense of purpose that went beyond the next immediate fight. Your average orc lives entirely in the present. Fight, eat, brawl, repeat. But the lads under me, they started to take pride not just in individual kill counts, but in the wider campaign. They'd swap tales. Oi, did you hear on Rotfang 7? A mob of our boys pretended to retreat, only to lure the enemy into a trap. We never used to do that, haw-haw. Yeah, Boss Grimslug taught them homies the meaning of surprise. That's proper Morky. Some boys even began painting a symbol on their armor, a crude rune that combined the orc glyph for boss and sneak. It was their way of honoring me style. I admit I got a bit choked up on a squig bone, I told them, when I first saw a mob of knobs sporting that on their shoulder plates like a badge of office. They called it the cunning badge. Imagine, orcs openly valuing cunning. Gork and Mork must have been proudy. Well, at least Mork was. Of course, not everything was perfect or smooth. We had setbacks now and then. On Junkrat Prime, a dying Inquisitor managed to trigger an exterminatus device as we overran his bunker, basically attempted to wipe the whole planet in fire. We lost a lot of boys and loot getting off that rock, but our ships weathered the firestorm and we survived. That Inquisitor, by the way, ended up as a peculiar charred skeleton that one of my knobs now wears as a decorative hat. On Skull Reach, appropriately named Dead World, we stumbled into a nest of Gene's Stealers, nasty bug Xenos. They tore up a whole contingent of Blood Axe commandos before we purged the hive with burner bombs. Nasty buggers, but short work once we got serious flame involved. There was also the time a goth boss in our ranks, Gorgrukka, got too fed up with sneaky tricks and wanted to go back to good old all-out crumpin'. He challenged me in front of his clan. I accepted, much to everyone's surprise, including my own, frankly. But I didn't get where I am by showing fear. Gorgrukka was huge, mean, and he came at me swinging a chain axe the size of a door. Perhaps he thought I'd cower or refuse to fight personally. Ha! I met him in the dueling pit, but I didn't say it'd be a fair fight. As he charged, I tossed a flashbang squig at his feet, blinding light, ouch, ducked under his wild swing, then shot him point-blank in the groin with my custom Mega Blaster. As he doubled over, I scrambled up his back like a squig and stabbed my power sword through the base of his thick skull. The big oaf died before he hit the ground, thoroughly electrified from the inside. Total fight time, maybe 8 seconds. The onlooking orcs were silent. When I hopped off and raised my bloodied sword, they erupted in cheers and crude laughter. "That was brutal and cunning," one yelled appreciatively. No one else challenged me after that. Not because they all lacked the courage, mind you, but because I'd proven that even in personal combat, I'd fight to win, not to satisfy some dumb notion of honor. And deep down, every orc respects that at least a little, because all they truly care about is victory and a good brawl, however you achieve it. Between the conquests, the legends, the occasional internal dramas snuffed out, we truly became an efficient war machine. I sometimes had to pinch myself. Figuratively, if I literally pinched myself, I might draw the attention of a runthard who'd think I was slacking off. This was all real. It was happening. A Gretchin was at the head of a WAAAGH that had carved out a huge swath of territory. By now, we threatened multiple Imperial sectors. I suspect we triggered a few Munitorum scrambles and emergency High Lord meetings on Terra. If only I could have been a fly on the wall. Yes, Lord Commander, it appears, an unusually directed greenskin horde led by, a Xenos class known as Gretchinus Greentide. Yes, that's correct, a Gretchin warlord. No, we are not joking, my lord. By Mork's teeth, I would have loved to see their faces. Now, all good things, or bad things, depending on who you ask, reach a tipping point. I reckon we were approaching one. The Imperium was reallocating forces to stop us. That much was clear. Our next fight proved it. At the planet of Auroria Servitus, a shrine world turned fortress, we encountered our stiffest opposition yet. Not just Guard, but Space Marines. Yep, the Angels of Death themselves finally deigned to intervene. I suppose the reports of what we'd done were too outrageous to ignore. A chapter of Astartes. The Ultramarines, I think, those pretty blue boys, arrived on Auroria Servitus just ahead of us to bolster defenses. Coming face to face with Space Marines is an Ork's dream. Finally, the big fight they crave. And it was a hell of a battle, no lie. These Marines were everything the stories say. Disciplined, superhuman, clad in ceramite, and utterly relentless. They drop-podded right into the thick of our initial wave and cut their way out in perfect formation. Bold, I'll give 'em that. One of their captains challenged our knobs head-on, a sight to behold as he cleaved through a score of boys with his glowing power sword. But Orks ain't impressed for long. They just see a good foe to crump. Soon enough, he was beset on all sides. I think it was WAAAGH, one of my mega-armored knobs, that finally tackled that captain and snapped him like a twig. I wish I could say the Marines were pushovers, but they gave as good as they got. For each one we dragged down, another 2 or 3 Orks fell. Their bolters churned out death in staccato volleys, disciplined and precise. They had a dreadnought, a walking sarcophagus of a fallen hero, stomping about, incinerating Orks with gouts of promethium. Our boys swarmed it and literally tore its arms off. That dread pilot inside must have had a lovely last few moments as we cracked his can open. They also had a land raider, fancy tank, that plowed through our lines until a lucky rocket from a death dread Ork walker blew its tracks off and we mobbed it. I, of course, was in the thick of things, though I kept my wits about me. I was no fool. I didn't personally duel an Astartes one-on-one if I could help it. Instead, I coordinated strikes, called out targets, and let my heavier hitters do their thing. On a couple occasions, I did get caught in a scrape. Once, a hulking Marine sergeant barreled through and actually grabbed me by the throat, lifting me off the ground. He snarled some litany about the Emperor's justice as he prepared to crush my neck. My vision was dimming, his ceramite gauntlet tightening. until Mangler, bless that squig's timing, latched onto the Marine's leg from behind and bit clean through the knee joint. Crunch! Marine and I toppled in a heap, he screaming as his lower leg separated. I coughed, regained my wits, and promptly emptied my custom shooter into his helmet as a thank you. I gave Mangler a pat. He'd lost a few teeth on that power armor bite, but squigs grow him back quick, much like orcs. Despite the ferocity of the Marines and their fervor, we simply had the numbers and, dare I say, the strategy to overpower them. It took the better part of a day's brutal fighting, but at last, the last few Ultramarines attempted to retreat to their Thunderhawk gunship. That's when I made an example. I had a mob of Lutas, Ork heavy gunners, lying in wait after we deduced where their extraction might be. As those remaining Marines fell back in good order, covering each other, my Lutas opened up with a crossfire of high-caliber slugger rounds and beams. The Thunderhawk that came roaring low to pick them up was hammered with so much flak it veered off, trailing smoke. The stranded Marines found themselves encircled by hundreds of jeering Orks. They fought to the last, as is their way, but soon they were naught but butchered gene seed on the ground. I think that was the point where the Imperium realized this wasn't a normal WAAAGH at all. Typically, Space Marines arrive to save a world from Orks. This time, they became just more DACA fodder for the Green Tide. I almost felt sorry for the last one we killed. He was a grizzled veteran with half his helmet missing, bellowing, "For Gilliman!" as an Ork chopper took his head off. Almost felt sorry, but not really. We don't shed tears, we collect teeth, and his went into the pile. Auroria Servitus was ours, and with it, mountains of holy iconography that the boys found hilarious to deface. By this point, I had to give credit to the Humies. They stopped underestimating us. They began to fight with a mad desperation. An inquisitor of the Ordo Xenos, pesky investigators, tried to assassinate me with a Kalidas shapeshifter. Amusing story that. The assassin disguised herself as a run-third Grot and actually got close to me while I was alone inspecting some loot. She morphed out of her disguise, a lithe, deathly figure with a neural blade. But guess what? She had disguised herself as Snicker, one of my personal Grot aides, and poor Snicker had the day before been messing with one of my booby-trapped boxes and gotten himself blown to Gibbs. I knew he was dead. So when I suddenly saw him waltz in my tent, I immediately was on guard. Her first strike grazed my arm. Nasty poison almost numbed it, but I fought through. I tumbled backward, making a ruckus crashing into shelves, which alerted my ever-alert squig, of course. Mangler burst into the tent and barreled into the assassin just as her blade tip nicked my neck. That distraction saved me. We tussled, and let me tell you, that shapeshifter was fast. But I fought dirty. Is there any other way? I flung sand in her eyes from the floor. I keep some handy, call it a habit from the old days. Then when she instinctively jumped back, I hurled an activated plasma charge I'd just snatched from the loot pile at her feet. Her reflexes were good. She dodged most of the blast, but lost an arm and part of a leg. End of the day, she lay there, reeling as I got up, dusted myself off, and took vindictive pleasure in letting Mangler chew her face off. Inquisitors, if you're hearing this through some astropath or whatever, send more assassins next time, ya gits. We could use the exercise. By now, you might wonder, did I ever think this would all come crashing down? Honestly, there were moments I thought, this is too good, something's gotta give. Perhaps a massive Imperial counterfleet, or even the appearance of one of those superhuman Primarch fellas they have nowadays, would stop us. But if I learned one thing, it's that belief is a powerful thing. The Orks believed in me, utterly, unquestioningly, and that did something. Each victory made us stronger, not just in material, but in spirit. I almost worried if we ever finally hit a wall, the letdown in morale might tear us apart. But that concern was far off. In the moment, the war was like an avalanche gather in size. I recall staring out from the pinnacle of a captured Imperial cathedral. I had a habit of climbing high vantage points after battles to survey and revel. The green banners of our horde fluttered below. Smoke from burning heretic libraries, or so the Humies called them, smudged the horizon. Tens of thousands of boys milled about, chanting, feasting on whatever beasties lived here, hammering scrap into new shooters. The cacophony of a successful greenskin camp, music to my ears. And me, a grot, standing atop what used to be a symbol of human supremacy, now defiled and adorned with orcish graffiti. I couldn't help but chuckle, a squeaky little laugh that grew and grew until I was guffawing into the wind. Sometimes you laugh because the only alternative is to pinch yourself, to be sure it ain't a dream. But it wasn't. It was brutally, gloriously real. It wasn't all laughs and cheer, of course. The galaxy is a grimdark place, as the Humies would say, and even an orc victory leaves behind shadows. I'd walk the camps and see a few quiet moments. A grot daubing a glyph on a little scrap of metal in memory of his squig buddy that got squashed, or a seasoned orc boy methodically driving teeth into his armor. Trophies from lost comrades as much as slain foes. Orcs don't really do mourning in a sentimental way, but they have their own sense of honoring the fallen through boasting of their deeds and carrying some remnant of them. Quite literally, if they eat 'em and make squig-goth stew, I realized I had become more than just a boss. I was the linchpin of their purpose. If I faltered or fell, would the WAAAGH collapse? Possibly. That weighed on me a bit. You might not think an orcoid leader, let alone a grot, feels responsibility. But I did. I felt like I was riding a mad squigoth down a steep slope. If I steered right, we'd smash through anything in our path, but one slip and we'd all roll into oblivion. So I made a vow to myself. Never show doubt. Never show weakness. If I had to fake confidence I didn't have, I'd fake it so well it'd become real. Fortunately, the longer this went on, the less I had to fake. Victory is a potent drug. Our WAAAGH carved out what the Imperium later called a green corridor across Segmentum Solar, a string of worlds essentially lost to Imperial control, connected by our fleets and constant raiding parties. Naturally, this could not stand forever. We all knew, perhaps even hoped, that eventually the humans would commit something overwhelming to stop us, perhaps a crusade force or some such, and when that hammer fell, we'd either break or become legends eternal. I steeled myself for that eventuality. I encouraged my big mech to push the limits on inventing new war machines. Under my rule, the mech workshops ran day and night. They loved it. No boss to arbitrarily stomp on their custom projects, as long as they produced results. We churned out new killer Khans, a half-finished Gargant. That's a city-sized orc effigy walker. We never quite got the Gargant fully operational, but even half-built it served as a mobile fortress and inspiration to the boys, and countless cruisers refitted with even more stolen tech. We had time amidst the onslaught to do this because, ironically, our rapid gains forced a lull. The Imperium retreated on some fronts, building up a counter-strategy. Fine by us, gave us time to consolidate and concoct fresh mayhem. In that interim, I took stock of my own growth. I stood nearly as tall as an orc boy now. Strangest thing, that. I wasn't becoming an orc per se. I still had my weaselly grot features, just a bit bulkier and with more muscle on me bones. Some might say I was turning into some kind of new breed, a midpoint between grot and orc. The lads joked I was growing up at last. I'll tell ya, when one of my old tormentors, Runthard Grax, who used to flick me ears for fun back in camp, saw me stride up nearly chest-high to him, clad in me piecemeal mega armor. Yep, I got a suit made, custom-fitted Grot-sized mega armor, courtesy of Kit's Crack. It's a beaut, with built-in force field and a remote detonator for squib charges, and flanked by knobs wanting my favor. The look on that Runthard's face was priceless. To his credit, he swallowed his pride and said, "Oi, boss, I always knew you had it in ya." Liar, but I let it pass. Instead, I tossed him a shiny new grabe stick and said, "You done good keeping dem grots in line all this time, Grax. Keep it up and make sure the snotlings polish me armor shiny, eh?" He did so with a nervous grin. Funny how the hierarchy had shifted, and all without me having to execute him. I was learning that sometimes mercy, if calculated, could inspire even an orc to loyalty. Well, maybe not mercy, more like measured indulgence. I only squashed those who truly needed squashing. The rest I gave a chance to get with the program, and most did. But enough of that introspection. The time came when the Imperials finally rolled out the big guns to oppose us. Our rampage had, apparently, drawn the attention of some of their most valorous forces. We heard rumors from terrified prisoners, a crusade fleet assembling, multiple Space Marine chapters, even the possibility of a Primarch leading them, one of those demigod gene sons of the Emperor. Apparently one named Robote Gilliman, the avenging something or other, had taken personal offense to our successes, possibly because we kicked around his ultra-smurfs on Auroria Servitus. Now, some leaders might balk at such news. Me, I nearly exploded with glee. The bigger the foe, the bigger the WAAAGH, as the old orc saying goes. Or maybe I just made that up. If they were bringing a Primarch, that was essentially a compliment of the highest order, and also a challenge I could not resist. Sure enough, as we pushed into the next sector, we found our path blocked at the planet of Gathalamor, a heavily fortified world that, unbeknownst to us, the Imperium had chosen as the line in the sand. The skies swarmed with Imperial Navy warships in numbers that dwarfed anything we'd seen so far. Our initial scout cruiser got vaporized before it could even send a full report. When our main fleet emerged from warp, we were met with a wall of macro cannon fire and torpedoes. The void battle for orbit of Gathalamor was beyond brutal. We had finally run into an enemy fleet that outgunned ours significantly. This was it, the decisive showdown. I won't sugarcoat it, we took heavy losses in space. Our Hulk, the Big Greenie, got boarded by elite Tempestus Scions, basically fancy stormtroopers, who caused havoc until we crushed them in the engine rooms. Several of our capital ships were annihilated in high orbit after taking out 2 battleships of the enemy. It was costly. Exactly the kind of battle orcs hate. Ones where you can't just rip into the foe with your bare hands until you reach them. But we had a secret weapon in space: belief. At a critical juncture when the Imperial blockade fleet was closing in overwhelming force, I commanded every weird boy and orc psyker, as well as any boy who could shout real loud, to join in a massive WAAAGH telepathic scream. WAAAGH and his weird boy coven stood at the prow of the Space Hulk and channeled the raw fury of a million greenskins psychically into the void. The phenomenon was disastrous for the humans. Their navigator warp guides went insane or died at their posts. Their astropaths' heads exploded from the overload, and many a human crewman fell writhing with green voices howling in their minds. That gave our ragtag fleet the edge to ram through the blockade, literally in some cases. One of our rocks plowed clean through an Imperial cruiser amidships and came out the other end, both vessels ruined, but hey, fair trade. We broke their orbital supremacy by sheer guts and lunacy, managing to bring a good chunk of our forces down to the planet. Of course, that meant we were now somewhat stranded with a furious enemy fleet, likely regrouping to cut off escape. But who said we planned to escape? War means never having to say, let's turn back. So there we were on Gathalamore, war-torn trenches, towering bastions, the whole 9 yards. And facing us was indeed a monumental host, not just guardsmen and tanks and marines of multiple chapters. I spotted Imperial Fist's yellow armor and some white-armored fellas of who knows what chapter. But also knights, fresh titans, sisters of battle. Those battle nuns, they were setting up whole shrines and chanting while toting heavy flamers. And at the apex, Roboot Gilliman, the Avenging Sun, Lord Commander of the Imperium himself in his gleaming armor, leading the defense. I'd be lying if I said we didn't feel a tingle of fear or awe at the sight. A Primarch is an awe-inspiring figure, even to alien eyes. Taller than any orc, wreathed in light, seemingly invincible. His mere presence made the Humies fight like demigods themselves, so buoyed by faith they were. This was the kind of battle that decides the fate of systems, the kind you tell the young'uns about, if you survive, the kind that orcs dream of. So naturally, we threw ourselves into it with everything we had. What followed was too epic for a blow-by-blow account, and parts are still a haze of red mist in my memory. Suffice to say, it was one for the history books, or in our case, the saga glyphs. The greenskin horde, my horde, collided with the might of the Ultramarines and their allies in a seismic clash that shook the very continents. Day and night lost meaning in continuous carnage. Gilliman led spearhead charges that punched into our lines with surgical precision. Where he strode, dozens of orcs fell like wheat to a scythe. I lost count of how many knobs perished trying to take him down, how many war machines he personally wrecked with that flaming sword of his. For a while, it looked like he might carve right through to my command post. I had to act fast and cunning. I wasn't about to meet him blade to blade. I'm bold, not insane. Instead, I devised a trap within a trap. I intentionally let one flank of our forces crumble under his onslaught, drawing him and his elite deeper toward a seemingly vital command bunker, which in fact was a colossal makeshift bomb our mechs had rigged from plasma reactors. I basically baited the greatest human general alive into walking into a giant booby trap. It almost worked, too. At the last moment, his superhuman instincts must have twitched, because he halted just before fully entering the kill zone. I'll be zogged. He sniffed out the ruse and yelled a warning to his troops, so we detonated it anyway, even with him not quite at ground zero. The blast still took out a huge swath of his honor guard and threw the Primarch 100 yards like a rag doll. For a few glorious seconds, I dared hope he'd been vaporized. But nope, the man is tough. He survived, wounded and smoldering, but alive, and very, very angry. After that, the finale of the battle was a blur of desperation and fury on both sides. Our numbers were dwindling. Theirs, though smaller initially, had the edge in sheer quality and resilience. One by one, my best knobs fell, my war machines ground to scrap. The field was littered with the wreckage of both armies. By the end, it boiled down to one last climactic confrontation before the gates of the planet's final fortress. On one side, Gilliman rallying his surviving Marines, Knights, and Imperial forces for one more push. On the other, me and the tattered remnant of WAAAGH Grimslug, still defiant, still hungry for one more kill. It was here, at this precipice, that fate decided to play its final card. And oh, what a twist it was. Picture this. The battlefield falls oddly quiet for a moment, both sides catching their breath, staring each other down amidst ruins and fires. The Primarch steps forward, shining in the gloom, ready to unleash Emperor knows what superhuman speech or challenge. And I, battered but unbroken, clamber atop the wreckage of a Baneblade tank to stare him down. Tiny old me versus that giant demigod. What a sight that must have been. He raises his flaming sword in salute, perhaps recognizing that I am the leader here. Damn right. Maybe he intended some final single combat to decide things, an ancient warrior tradition. Who knows? He opened his mouth to speak across the distance between us, but he never got the words out, because at that precise moment, reality itself hiccuped. I'm not a weird boy. I don't fully understand what happened. Maybe it was the accumulated psychic craziness, or just sheer chaotic probability in a galaxy of war. But a massive warp rift tore open in the sky above, a sickly, warpish, green-purple tear. Out of it spilled tendrils of raw chaos, demonic energy flooding the war zone. Everyone, Ork, human, space marine, froze in shock, looking up. From this rift, a claw emerged, a claw attached to a gargantuan, monstrous form, eyes the size of tanks, a roar that made our ears bleed and the earth shake. Yes, believe it or not, a greater demon of Khorne. That's one of the Chaos gods, specifically one that really likes blood and skulls. Basically an even angrier orc, if you can imagine, decided to crash our party. This colossal bloodthirster, wings spanning the horizon, burst into being smack dab between our forces. It was drawn, I guess, by the unprecedented carnage, like a shark to chum. And it did not discriminate. With an earth-shattering bellow, it lashed out at anything it saw, eager to add to the skull pile. It swung a whip and axe that could cleave knights in half. Indeed, one knight got decapitated instantly by its opening move. Well, you can imagine, all hell broke loose again. Suddenly, it wasn't Orks versus Imperium. It was everyone versus this big, cornate bastard. Honestly, at that point, both sides were so exhausted and depleted, a supernatural murder hulk was the last thing we needed. But sometimes the only answer to what else can go wrong is that. I will say one thing for Guilliman. The moment the demon appeared, he didn't hesitate. He bellowed new orders, temporarily allied with his bitter foes, us, to survive this. His forces turned all guns on the daemon. Without needing a word, my boys did the same. Orcs love a good monster fight, after all. In an instant, former enemies were side by side, blasting a greater demon that technically wanted to kill us all equally. The Bloodthirster was like a force of nature, though. He, or it, plowed through lines, smashed remaining tanks like toys. It clashed directly with Guilliman in a duel that was incredible to behold. The Primarch parrying blows that could split mountains, landing counter-strikes that actually made the beast roar in pain. I wasn't idle either. I figured if fate gives you a bloodthirster, you try to kill a bloodthirster. What a story that'd be. So I rallied what orcs I had left. Side by side with a handful of ultramarines and sisters, we poured fire into the beast's flanks. I even found myself at one point shoulder to shoulder with an Imperial commissar, both of us emptying our pistols at a slavering pack of lesser demons that had started spawning around the big one. He gave me the funniest look, like, "Is this real life?" But then just shrugged and kept shooting. Pragmatism at its finest. Finally, in a combined effort worthy of a saga, we brought the Bloodthirster low. Guilliman drove his sword into its chest in a radiant flash, while simultaneously a volley of orc rockets, fired from what remained of a Morkanaut walker we had, blew off one of its wings. The great demon toppled. Immediately, like frenzied ants, orcs and even some zealous sisters swarmed the dying beast, hacking and blasting until its essence gave out, and it dissolved into so much ectoplasmic goo. And just like that, it was over. Silence. Smoke. The few of us left, on both sides, stood there panting, dripping blood and ichor amidst absolute devastation. There was a strange moment of solidarity, almost. We'd all just fought together against literal hell. Maybe in another reality we'd have all clasped hands and sung campfire songs next. But not this reality. Gilliman, battered and bloodied, managed to stay on his feet. The surviving humans gathered around him, and the surviving orcs stumbled toward me. We were outnumbered now. My WAAAGH was down to a handful of diehards. The Primarch looked across at me, and even at that distance I swear I could see an air of respect in his otherwise stern gaze. He raised the glowing sword once more, as if in salute for a battle well fought. I wasn't about to spit on that. We'd given as good as we got and nearly toppled a legend. So I spat out a glob of blood, not all mine, and gave him a cheeky grin and a nod. In my own guttural language, I yelled, "Oi, Humi, this was a good un. Till next time, eh?" He probably didn't understand the words, but got the gist. Then, wisely, I ordered the retreat. Living to fight another day is the most cunning move there is, sometimes. We activated our emergency teleporters. Thank Gork and Mork, the mechs had calibrated them, though they only had enough power left for one jump. In a flash of green light, what remained of WAAAGH Grimslug, including yours truly, zapped out into orbit and onto a spare cruiser that had hung back. We hightailed it out of that system before the Imperial fleet could stop us, leaving behind Gathalamor, or what was left of it. Honestly, it was practically a dead world after that showdown. The humans didn't pursue immediately. They'd paid a steep price for victory. And what victory? They held a ravaged planet, but our WAAAGH wasn't fully dead. We, the survivors, became a roaming menace, harrying Imperial supply lines, popping up where least expected for years after. We'd never regain the full momentum, true, but nor could they ever forget us. In fact, I hear tell that to this day, in the war-torn sectors we rampaged, mothers still scare their kids with "behave" or "the runty boss, and his squigs will get ya." Heh, music to my ears. Eventually, I found myself recounting these events, just like I am now, in a dusty corner of some far galactic rim, with a new crop of orc youths gathered wide-eyed around me. They listened to every word, some skeptical, "No way a Grot did that." Some in utter awe. But all of them know one thing: it did happen, 'cause here I am, living proof that even the smallest greenskin can change the course of a wow. I'll wrap this up with a bit of hard-earned wisdom for any who might be wondering what the point of it all was, besides a jolly good time. In the end, the tale of Grot, Warboss, Grimslug, that's me, har har, showed the galaxy something important. Never underestimate us. The Imperium thought orcs were predictable, brutish, unleadable beyond whoever's biggest. We showed him a surprise or three. We taught him that cunning and brutality together are an unstoppable combination. We taught him that even a lowly Grot with enough guts and brains can give their greatest heroes a run for their money. As for me, I'm still out here, still plotting, still fighting. The WAAAGH I started ain't done, not by a long shot. Sure, it's smaller now, more fragmented. But there's a saying amongst the orcs that's cropped up: if the runt can rule, anything's possible. I like that. It means someday, somewhere, another runted little fella might rise up and do something crazy like I did. Or maybe I'll rise again with a new WAAAGH when the time's right. Who knows? The future is one big, green, violent question mark, just how we like it. If you've stuck around this long listening to my tale, you've either got the patience of a grot or the interest of a blood axe. Either way, I hope you learned something. Maybe it's that Warhammer of any kind, 40K or otherwise, has room for a bit of the unexpected. Maybe it's just that this was a damn good yarn to drink to. For me, the moral's simple. It ain't about how tall you stand. It's about how loud your wah is. Or as some Humie I once squished said, I'll paraphrase. It's not the size of the orc in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the orc. By Gork, he was right. And that goes for grots, too. In the end, the galaxy's a big place full of big enemies and bigger battles. I started as a nobody, a runty grot with no purpose beyond survival. I became a warboss who shook worlds. If that don't make you grin, nothing will. So next time you see a little green git scurrying about, maybe give him a second look. You never know, he might be the next prophet of the WAAAGH or something. Unlikely, but who am I to say? I'll be out there in the stars, riding with my boys and looking for the next great scrap. Perhaps one day I'll get me rematch with old Roboot G. Perhaps I'll find an even bigger challenge. Heard rumors of some silent metal skeleton king out in the void, or them nasty tyrannid bugs bringing a good fight. We'll see where fate takes us. But whatever comes, remember this tale and remember who's in charge. I was the runt who became a boss, the Gretchin who led a WAAAGH. I turned the galaxy upside down and had a good laugh doing it. If that ain't a proper orky saga, I dunno what is. All right, you gits, that's enough jawing from me. I can see some of you getting that gleam in your eyes, ready to rush off and start your own fight, or perhaps ready to grab another round of fungus brew, both noble pursuits. I ain't gonna hold you here with more gab. Just take this with you. Never doubt the little guy. He might just surprise you, and if he's an orc, or even a grot, he'll definitely surprise you with something loud and explosive. Me? I'm far from done, even if this particular story is. The galaxy's still out there, full of enemies what need a good crumpin'. I've got my shooter, my squig, and my sneakiness, and trust me, I aim to use 'em all. Maybe one day you'll hear another tale of Warboss Grimslug, or maybe you'll be in it. Ha ha, either way, I'll be seeing ya on the next WAAAGH. Keep your ears open for a high-pitched war cry and a rumble of a million boots. It just might be us coming back for round 2. And when that day comes, oh, you better believe I'll give an even grander show. Because if there's one thing I love, it's defying expectations and having a good laugh while doing it. So ears to the wall, to all the gits, big and small, who make it possible, and to the never-ending fight that keeps life interesting. Lift your tankard of fungus brew, polish your chopper, and get ready for whatever comes next. In the grim darkness of the far future, there's always something that needs a proper crumpin', and we'll be there to give it good and loud. WAAAGH!